Welcome to another episode of Coffee Time. I'm your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching. Coffee Time is a space where I invite you into the everyday, real talk conversations I'm having with the magical humans in my life. My sole aim, SOUL, is to create as genuine a connection as possible over this virtual platform, and I am so excited to be inviting you along for the ride. Together, we laugh, we rant, we introspect, all the good stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in. Rhiannon, thank you for joining me today. I know we're gonna kind of come back to, I feel like I should stop calling these things topics because I really like just the natural conversation. And I know that you and I have talked a couple times now, and we both are kind of complete chatterboxes, so we could probably do this for hours. But the one thing that was standing out that I really wanted to start with from like when we were planning this conversation was that after our first talk, I discovered that we both have a love for like angsty 2000s music, such as like, I think Billy Talent and like all those kinds of things.
MSI.
And yeah, MSI. Oh my God. And yeah, and it just like, it kind of pointed to me that like, because we had talked about our journeys now in like terms of this thing about like coming home and like figuring out like what is home. And I think that music, for me at least as a teenager, was so indicative of the fact that like I had no idea where I fit or how I fit or like who I truly was. I think as like a teenager, at least for me, I had this notion of like, I know what I want. I own this and whatever, but really I was like so lost. And I think that's why I identified a lot with that kind of music. Of MSI, of course, seeing as like it doesn't have a genre, so it totally makes sense. But yeah, anyway, I don't know. I thought that was like a fun thing that I noticed from us and those weird little things I put on Facebook about like, what concert have I not actually been to?
They're not weird though. And I was actually really surprised that I think I got the first one right. Because I like thought about it in the context of me. I'm like, okay, so these are all bands that I like and listen to. And I'm like, which one would I have not seen? And then I was right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But I totally get what you mean about the whole music thing. Like my favorite band is Bayside, and I feel like every time I say that, most people are like, I don't know who that is.
But everyone feels that way about my favorite band too, so that's fine.
Yeah. Well, what's your favorite band?
Well, I guess favorite is a difficult, and I'm not like a music person, so a lot of this, starting with this point of conversation is probably very counterintuitive for me. But the band that like I think has had the most impact for me, that is still a go-to for me on like any given day, is the Hush sound.
Okay. I like the Hush sound.
Okay. I met them too.
So I've only seen Bayside live once, but I do have a Bayside tattoo. It's their logo and it's solid black and it's on my ribs. So they must be my favorite band.
Right.
But it's funny because like I totally get what you mean about the music thing and that kind of being a component of not feeling like you belong anywhere. And I feel like especially when you're a teenager, you just like everything is the end of the world to you. Like anything negative is the end of the world. Everything positive is like, this is the way it's going to be forever and nothing's ever going to change. And then you still like don't really feel like you belong anywhere.
I feel like you're singing a Hawthorne Heights song right now.
Yeah. I just need to complain a little bit about getting out of my hometown and
which is probably what we'll talk about.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, and then so like I found Bayside when I was like 14 years old, and they've been my favorite band ever since. And even now, like I was listening to them a couple weeks ago and like blasting them in my car on my way to like from place to place for work, and I'm just like, oh yeah, like I am a sad little emo kid at heart. Like none of that's changed. I'm like, I just function a lot better in society now.
That's so funny. Yeah, we whenever my partner and I have gone on like road trips or whatever, I think the first one was we were going down to Seattle. So it's not super far for us. It's like with traffic, it's like a 4-hour drive. It should really be like 2.5. But the traffic is always ridiculous. And I put on Billy Talent and he is young enough that he had never heard of Billy Talent, but like instantly just loved it. And I'm like sitting in the car, just like screaming out the windows, like, "Into the river below," like, you know, and like just going crazy. I probably don't want to put that on YouTube, but it's happening. So whatever. And just like, yeah, just going with it. But it also instantly brought me back to those feelings that I had at that point in time. And it's interesting because as a teenager listening to that music, I didn't really feel that it augmented those feelings of like disconnect or even like some more depressive feelings that I had or any of that at the time. But now with where I'm at and the journey I've taken, listening to it can instantly take me back to the emotions I was feeling then, which were my normal then. But now they're like so heavy to feel just because of the like path that I've taken in terms of,
Yeah.
you know, coming home to myself and figuring out what that is. So that was also something really interesting to just observe. Like, as much as it was really fun to bask in the nostalgia, like in a car driving down I-5 and like screaming out the windows, it also really showed me like just how broken and lost I was back then.
Yeah, I completely get that. Because like even when I am listening to bassline, I'm like, yeah, these are all my favorite songs and I love them and I'm gonna like scream them in my car when I'm alone and maybe even with my partner sitting in the passenger seat. But then like there's still that underlying like thing where you're just grappling with those feelings that are kind of coming back up. And even if you can identify them now, or you know how to handle those a little better, it's just so strange. It feels like you're sitting in your own body with like your teenage self and yourself now, and you're trying to like comfort your teenage self and be like, it's okay, we're here now.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're just like, well, shit, like we were there and that really sucked.
Yes. That reminds me of something I've probably shared on another episode because it was a really pivotal moment for me before. But when I first got sober, I remember like things, and I was, oh God, how old was I? I guess about 21, I think. And I remember calling my mentor at the time and being like, just like crying on the phone. And she was like, "Don't worry, like it gets better." And I was like, "No, but that's the problem." Because like if it gets better, those times that were really shitty feel so much worse and so
Right.
much heavier. And I think that's part of what I feel now when I have those like nostalgic reminisce moments on, you know, driving down the highway, is realizing like just how bad it was. But at the time that was just my normal. And if that's my kind of equilibrium, it doesn't feel so bad. Um, but yeah, going back to it, it's like very, very jarring and yeah, very uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, no, I totally get that, especially when I'm so like, well, we're on the topic of home today. And so I have lived um, not in like a ton of places, but where I currently am is where I feel like I am the most home. Like I do feel like
Mm-hmm.
I have found home in in pretty much every sense. Um, but when I was a teenager, so we lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, me and my mom, from the age of 4 to 14 is when we moved to the area that we're in now. And I'm sure like that point of reference means nothing to most people that will be watching this. They're just like, what are you talking
You
about?
never know. Yeah.
So, okay, well, so here, I'll start with like, I was born in California. And so my parents got divorced when I was 3. And from there, my mom ended up getting full custody of me. We moved to Louisiana, which is where my grandma was. And yeah, so we made our way like halfway across the country. We lived there for a year, and then my grandma got promoted to a better position within her company. And she ended up getting transferred to Charlottesville, Virginia. Um, and so we moved there with her because my mom is originally from Hawaii and she had no family in like the contiguous US. So we just followed my grandma. And we were there for 10 years. And I consider that my hometown. Like I love it very much. And at this point, like right now, I am very homesick for it. Um, But yeah, there was just like, there was a lot that happened in those 10 years. And I think that definitely contributed to how I felt as a teenager, especially when we moved to the area that we're in now, because we're in an area called Northern Virginia, which is, it's literally what it sounds like. It's the northern part of Virginia, but I live 5 minutes outside of DC, so it's like a completely different like vibe. Like the pace is so different. I don't live in a small little mountain college town anymore. I live literally like 5 minutes from the nation's capital, which is cool, but also kind of sucks. um, because even though I am a US citizen, I'm not a fan of how our country handles a lot of things, especially what's going on now. And so yeah, like when I listened to music that I loved and was discovering when I was kind of like coming of age at that time, it brings me right back to all of that, which is, I mean, I'm 28 now, and I'm doing like a lot of inner work with myself, and trying to give myself as much grace and permission as possible, because like there were a lot of external factors. But yeah, it's like bringing me back to being an 11-year-old kid and realizing like, oh, I'm depressed. Like, why am I sad all the time for no reason? And then like getting thrust into therapy, and yeah, um, I don't really know where to go from there. I'm really bad with segues. I just kind of talk.
No, we're just talking. Don't even worry. Um, yeah, I moved. When did I first moved around the age of 10 as well. I think that's when you said for you. Was it around 10 when you moved? Um,
Well,
yeah,
that was
not
like
as
the
far.
second move,
The second
or
one? Okay.
or
Yeah.
third. Yeah,
Oh,
no, third move. I moved when I was 3, and then again
yeah.
at 4, and then again at 14.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I guess for me, when I was 10, we moved not far, like just from another like city close to here. It's like a half hour away, other side of the river kind of thing, to roughly where I'm actually at now. Um, and that also coincided with whatever led up to my parents' divorce and a lot of things for me, like figuring myself out. And I think it was around that time where I started to recognize, sorry, I see a lag, so I'm going to slow down a bit. I started to recognize that, I don't know how to word this. Like for myself, it was where I started to see perhaps that I had more of a queer identity. But like as a 10-year-old, how do you reconcile that, especially as a 10-year-old in Catholic school? So that, yeah, so that was a lot of what I was dealing with. And like, I remember always feeling very on the outside of everything. Like it was like, no matter what I did to try to fit in, I just couldn't like break the code of
Mm-hmm.
what everyone else clearly had already figured out. And that led
Like there
to,
was some secret that was being kept from you
yeah,
on purpose.
pretty much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that. Elementary school was very rough for me. So,
Yeah, I like honestly, I think most of school up until age 15, and even then, but for like different reasons. And I think it
mhm.
was until age 15 where I grappled with a lot of those feelings of just like not fitting at all. And then age 15 came and I actually moved to a public school because they had a philosophy program and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I
I
went
actually wish
there
that
and
was a thing. I wish that
yeah,
was a thing where I
right?
lived.
It's yeah, it was awesome. And like that's what I went on to study formally as well. So like I know for myself it was the decision I needed to make. But with that came like, okay, now I'm in a place where I can explore my queer identity like fully. And at the time I didn't know the term queer. Like that's what I use now. But at the time it
Mm,
was like you were straight or you were a lesbian. Like there
right.
wasn't anything else. And so I was that. And that led to more bullying and more disconnect in different ways. But it also did lead to like finally having at least some people who could see a part of me for what it really was. But that's when a lot of my kind of substance issues also surface, because I think, one thing might have settled, but I guess I was like finally at a place where I felt like I could explore all these things, but it was also so overwhelming, and I didn't have the tools to properly and like safe, I don't want to say safely, but healthfully maybe process it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just hadn't grown up with that. It's not that my parents didn't, it's nothing about them. It's just that for
Right.
whatever reason, for me, those tools hadn't clicked yet. And so then trying to approach all these different things and grapple with all these like interpersonal things that are normal to come up for a teenager. Like, I think that's when a
Right.
lot of us kind of go through that. But for me, it felt so overwhelming, and I was so lost and just like, I think honestly terrified. And that's when I decided that I needed to move to Toronto. And so I think, or Toronto, as we really say, but I always enunciate it differently now that I've moved back to Vancouver, which is another part of the story. But I think that's something you and I had touched on, was like, so I ended up moving there when right after graduation, pretty much. I turned 18 and off I went to go to a university I'd never even seen in person, to study philosophy. And I had been to that city before. And I think being in that city, and it's changed over time, but like the first time I went there, I think was the first time I felt what home was for me. And like, for me, home is like being okay to just be where I am.
Yeah.
And that was the first place I felt that way. And I think for me, it came from that big city feel where it was like, it was totally okay for me to just fade into the background and just watch everything kind of pass me by and like still be there. But at the same time, on that like, deep introspective 18-year-old way of doing things, I felt like I still had a part to play. Because I think the thing about a big city is there's so many things and people going on all the time, but like they all need to be there to create what it is on that broad level of things. So I felt important and I felt like I belonged, but I also felt like it was okay if I didn't want to be seen, and
Right.
I could just be.
Like you
And
kind of get lost in that sea, but you still matter to that sea's ecosystem.
yeah, exactly. And that was, I think, the first time I well, past when I had my first drink, which was probably like a false sense of experiencing that was
Mhm.
the first time where I felt I could finally settle and just like breathe. And I think that's probably a big part of like why I fell in love with that city, and like even still. And someone actually asked me that recently, which reminded me of our conversation that we were going to be having today. They asked me like, if you love it so much, why don't you come back? Because they asked, like, do you miss it ever? And I was like, I miss it every freaking day. Like, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of something that happened in that city or a part of that city I want to walk through again. And, and that feeling. And like, as soon as I think about Toronto, I have that feeling. And so just like you were saying, like, you have a place that most feels like home. Like, for me, it's there. And the cool thing about it is it feels that way even if I'm not with the people.
Yeah.
So like, I go back and there's plenty of friends to visit, but it's not even that gives me that feeling to its like fullest extent. It's really just walking through the streets alone and just like breathing in that stagnant, muggy city air. um, but for some reason, it's just still there. And yeah.
I totally get what you mean. So I feel like I'm at home in other cities too, not just the one that I live in. So I live in Alexandria City, which is it's like not necessarily like where the US started, but we have a lot of like US history that started here. Like George
Mm.
Washington had a townhouse that is literally walking distance from my office where I'm sitting right now.
Cool.
It's cool, but once you live here for a while, you're just like, God, George Washington gets old so
Yeah, it's probably cool for me because I've never been there, and I
well, right.
haven't.
Well, that's why
Yeah.
I'm so fascinated with history in other places because I'm like, ooh, something new and something way older than the US. And um, but like I feel very at home when I'm in Buffalo, New York,
Mm.
which is where my partner's entire family was from. Not was is from, and where he was born. And so we go back about once a year together. And this is about the time of year that we would take a road trip up there and stay for a few days. So I'm really missing it right now. But yeah, like I feel very comfortable there. Like even though I have no connection to Buffalo, New York outside of my partner and his family, and like who knows if our partnership is permanent. But I still feel so comfortable there. The same with Chicago as well. Like I've never lived there. I've only ever visited, but I just feel like I can move through the city and like no one is going to see me and be like, oh, you don't belong here. Um, and yeah, so I totally get that. And then of course there's Charlottesville, which is like I miss Charlottesville every single day, and I've considered moving back there, but I don't know if I would actually be happy if I lived there again. um because again, like that's another one of those places that we visit about once a year, and I've gotten my partner onto loving Charlottesville, not quite as much as me, but he does enjoy it. And every time we're there, I just get really sad when we have to leave. But then I also think, not necessarily at the same time, but I'll think about all of the struggles that I experienced when I was there, and like all of the bad that I experienced when I was there. And I mean, it has definitely made me who I am today. Like I wouldn't be the person that I am. I wouldn't be doing the things that I'm doing without any of those experiences, but like they sucked. Like they made me like a really sad, depressed kid, and I felt that that's where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. Like I felt like I belonged in that city, but I didn't feel like I belonged with the people in that city. Because like elementary school was a rough time for me. Like I felt like there was that secret that everyone was keeping from me, and like no one liked me and I couldn't figure out why. And I just thought like, but I'm not like weird. I don't do anything like super gross or cringy. Like I'm sitting at a table with a kid that eats their boogers and they think that that's like nutritious. And I'm over here just like wishing that I could have the same striped socks as other kids because that might help me fit in, and then when we moved up to Arlington, which is a neighboring city of where I am now, um, it was part of the decision to move there was so that I could get away from Charlottesville, because I felt like I really needed to not be in that same place because I was, turning 14 and everything sucked and I was really sad. And I was on Zoloft, and that's when Zoloft had just come out, and I was on like the maximum dosage that they could give me as a child, and they're like, well, we don't know what to do for you, and I'm like, I'm just gonna move 2 hours away, that'll fix everything. And then yeah, like when we moved up here, it was, sorry, I'm trying to be like mindful of
the light. You're fine, don't worry.
not having a light.
Just have a glow around you. Yeah.
Just like a nice little halo. And then when we moved up here, it was strange because I was like going through my like little emo kid phase, but it was like Charlottesville is a very like just eccentric place in general. And so I just like wore whatever the hell I wanted to wear. My hair was cut super short and dyed like this patchy turquoise, and
oh my god, me too.
that was like my first like true like chopped off all my hair and just dyed it. And then I moved up here, and of course this was back when CDs were still a thing. So I had my like little Walkman that I would take to school every day, and I had my CD case, and I had a Deftones CD case. um and then I remember like when I started school up here, there were, everyone was fascinated with the new kid because I was new. And then some kids in my science class were just like, oh yeah, like what CDs do you have? And then I like let them look through it. They're like, oh my god, you like Bright Eyes too? And I'm like yeah, I didn't know anyone else knew who he was. And it was weird because I had this sense of like people saw me, but I didn't feel like they saw me for me. I felt like they saw me for like my stuff, if that makes sense. Like not my physical stuff necessarily, but just like the exterior.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terrifying, but also really exciting because I was like, oh my God, people want to hang out with me. Like these people are really excited to be around me and they have they don't know me at all. And then I went through some like other struggles because again, I was still like a severely depressed teenager and I had like insane anxiety. So that caused like issues with school and ended up like not being friends with any of these people outside of like those 2 months. Um, and then, yeah, high school was just a strange time as well. I skipped a lot of school. I skipped so much school that I got held back in the 8th grade
Oh my
because
goodness.
I didn't show up and I
I
didn't.
was the opposite. I had like perfect attendance for 2 years. And even when I went to university, I got swine flu
Oh
and
my
I
gosh.
didn't go to the doctor. I still went to every single lecture. I probably infected multiple people just from being in the room. For the record now, because we're recording this at the time of the kind of peak time of COVID
Yes, you're doing a
19.
good job of staying home.
I am fully staying home. I only go outside to take out the garbage, and I'm also not sick. So there's that. Um, but yeah, I was like the opposite. But I think for me, that was like a way to have some sort of a sense of control and like
Yeah.
create something about my identity that was mine. In terms of like, yeah, school is what I do. And for me, school, like academia, was always a safe place that I could turn to when everything else felt like it was falling apart.
For me, it was the complete opposite. School was always a place where I felt very exposed
Mm.
and just like something bad was going to happen to me if I showed up to school one day, no matter what. Like I had terrible experiences starting in preschool with like teachers and kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still processing that as a nearly 30-year-old woman. But at least I can recognize it now. But
Mm-hmm.
I would like skip a lot of school and I would just stay home because that was the only place that I felt like I could like do anything because I had full control over me
Mm-hmm.
at that point. And I did like the really nerdy thing and I would skip school and then I'd walk to the library and then I'd check out like 10 books. And then I got to a point where I was reading a book a day.
Oh my God,
Um,
you were Matilda.
and yeah, well, okay, so honestly, I love Matilda and I will take that.
That's awesome.
Um, but yeah, like I hated going to school because I just felt like, and it was not even a problem with like learning or like I love to learn. I hate being forced to learn and being told that this is what you need to know, even if it doesn't matter and is not applicable outside of this classroom for 1 year in your entire life. And like I did well on my tests and I would show up to school 2 months later and then kids would just be like, where have you been? It's a test day. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, I'm here for the test. And then I get, like an 89 on it. And they'd be like, how? And I'm like, because I'm not stupid.
Yeah.
um,
That's funny.
but no offense to anyone that needs more time to study for tests.
Well, and some people need the in-classroom learning and other people don't. And maybe that's where like the formal education system might not be ideal because it can't fit to everyone's needs, but at the same time, it's hard to create any sort of like standard system that does. And that's like a whole other conversation.
That's another episode.
Yeah, right. And I mean, personally, I know there's a lot of controversy over this. I like the structure of formal education. I agree that there needs to be room for certain students to have a more customized approach when it calls for it. But I don't think that it's a bad, like, foundational kind of system to then branch out off of. I think the problem is there is no extra support for the kids that need something a little bit different. And that's where it becomes an issue. But like for me, like I needed that structure and like I liked going to school every day. And it was not the social aspect because the social aspect that meant like firecrackers being thrown at my head in the smoke pit and the school not caring because it was off school property and wasn't their problem. And that's how they like dissociated from that, but the structure of like going to the classroom and like, honestly, I was the kid who like had lunch with their teacher every Friday. And I mean, her and I still talk and apparently she's friends with my uncle, which we found out recently. And that's like totally weird. But like that I needed. and because I don't think I could get it elsewhere. And like, I didn't have anyone else who could stimulate me intellectually in the way that, that was necessary for me at that point in my life. And like, that was the distraction from everything else. And it, you know, like, just like for you, it sounds like going to the library and getting those books and reading, like that was your safe place. Like for me, you know, writing the essay in the classroom, or, you know, doing the organic chemistry model things with my lab mate, like that was my safe place, I guess. And I don't know if that relates back to the home thing, but I think that was probably part of starting to figure it out, was like finally having that place where I felt safe. And it wasn't necessarily like me being me. It was just like similar to like going through that crazy busy city, like that created that moment where I could like breathe.
Yeah. No, so I do think it kind of relates to home. So for example, in like, again, elementary school was really rough for me. Pretty much everything up until high school was just like not a fun time at all. In high school, I felt like I kind of found like a little bit of my place where I could just be who I was at that time. I'm thankful that I'm not that person anymore, but but I'm thankful for who she was. And so like my first grade teacher, she was like I was so fixated on her, not in like a weird, like creepy way, but she felt like a very safe person to me.
Oh my God.
So like my first grade teacher, her name was Mrs. St. Dennis. And I just like, I thought she was like the most beautiful, like put together, like warm, caring person. And I had her, I think twice in elementary school, and kindergarten was an experience. So when I got to first grade and I had this teacher, and like you can feel people's energy, you know? And so I like her, she was just very like calm, caring. And I was like, wow, this is great. And I mean, of course I was a kid, so I don't remember a ton, but I remember enough. And like she was hands down my favorite teacher. Like even to this day, I tried Googling her and I couldn't find her. So but yeah, and like so when I was at school, she provided some like safety and comfort. So she made at least like me just looking at her providing instruction felt kind of like a sense of home for me, until I actually did get home where you know my mom was, and my mom was my best friend up until like age 15, you know, and then there was like family personal stuff, and I still love my mom very much, but like we were very, very close. So it was nice having that kind of sense of security somewhere else, because I didn't feel like I could get that outside of just being home. And even being at home sometimes didn't necessarily feel like home or a safe, healthy environment. So yeah, I think that definitely relates to our overall topic that we're trying to stick to.
Well, and I think that that's all the important part. Like if I think home is, and it's so funny because this was one of my themes for the year, actually. So I kind of really like that this came up for us when we first met, was about home. And like, for me, it was about creating a space like physically in my place here that you see behind me, where I feel safe and comfortable and like can cry or can meditate or can do those things that I was feeling like I couldn't. Like I didn't have a physical location in this space that I feel I could explore that way. And so I've been really focusing on creating that. And it was funny because I this year decided to like try yoga for the first time, and was doing that, right? I was doing that yoga with Adrienne thing, which is awesome. And she does like a 30-day live one, which I just did the recordings afterwards, but for January each year. And the theme for this one, at least, I don't know if it's the same every year, was home. And it was all about the journey. And I think that has been a really important thing to recognize. And I think that's also where, like, when, you know, my friend asked me that question of like, well, if you love it so much, like, why don't you come back? And yeah, granted, I could knee-jerk reaction, just move back across the country to Toronto, because like I've done it before coming back to Vancouver,
Mm-hmm.
and definitely regretted it in some ways. And there was like a grief process around that. But also it's okay to acknowledge, I think, that like I don't think home is some final destination. Just like who I am is not a final destination. It's about that journey. And so if the point I'm at right now is, sitting in my really messy condo in White Rock and yeah, daily thinking about how much I miss Toronto, but like I don't need to go back there right now. Like that's
Yeah.
part of that journey, and that's okay. And I think that's why I'm able to just be here now. Whereas before, I didn't have the tools to just be. And so I didn't really get, it sounds so like floofy, but like I didn't really get to experience the journey because I was constantly running and trying to find that thing that would fix it instead of just being here for it. And I think being here for it is part of what actually creates that ongoing sense of home. It's just that what that is will change over time.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree. And earlier today, I was actually thinking about how home is something that's ever changing. So I'm really glad that
I
you
love
brought that
that.
up. Because I was like, okay, I need like talking points for this conversation. And I was like, I know I'm not going to stay on topic because I can't even have a conversation with my partner in my own house and
I
stay
was
on
gonna
topic.
I was gonna say I can't even have a conversation in my own head. So like I
Yeah,
think your example was better than mine. Yeah.
I feel you on that one too, though. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today, and I was like, I feel like I'm at home right now in the city that I live in and in the apartment that I'm living in and at the brokerage that I'm working with and things like that. But that doesn't mean that this is going to be home forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like I keep feeling some like both internal and external pull to go back to Charlottesville. I don't know why, and I don't know what that would be for, or if it's just me being really sad and having a lot of emotions at the moment because there's a lot of things that are happening right now due to the current health crisis
Mm-hmm.
that are kind of I I'm having to reevaluate what home is going to look like going forward.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like it's definitely not something that's permanent, and that's okay. And
Mm-hmm.
home can definitely be the same thing more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So like I love where I live now. My city makes me so happy. I love my neighborhood. I love, you know, my my colleagues at my office. I love my team. um but I don't know if I'm going to stay and be here like 10 years from now. I might end up coming back in 20 years and be very happy and feel that same sense of security, but who knows? Um, but yeah, at the moment I am having to face the idea of not having any of this. So like we're in the Rona times at the moment, and
Rona's a hardware store here, just so you
is
know.
it?
So it's kind of funny. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I was like, oh, what
um,
aisle? No, I'm kidding.
Aisle, everything is falling apart and we're not giving you any of the tools to fix it.
So home improvement? Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
general improvement.
Yeah.
So with everything that's going on now, I mean, I'm sure everyone at this point knows the US is like the epicenter of it all at the moment. And I personally am not a fan of our current administration, which I'm sure plenty of people share the same sentiment. Um, but I live right outside of Washington, D.C., so I get to
Mm.
see and hear and deal with a lot of the stuff that goes on with that. Like a lot of my neighbors work, you know, at the Pentagon and things like that.
Oh, crazy.
So yeah, I see a lot of this stuff firsthand. And like in Virginia, our governor is handling things fairly well, but I mean, we in the US, we don't have a lot of resources
Mm.
available to us to prevent like total economic collapse. And myself and my partner are having to like grapple with that right now. He's completely unemployed and has filed for unemployment benefits, but it's been a month now, and he hasn't received anything. We have no idea if and when any benefits will come in. And then like for me, I've been super busy with work, but the way that my compensation works is that I don't get paid until a transaction closes. So I do a lot of legwork for hopefully some money.
But not always. Yeah.
Yeah, but not always, and not always a lot. And so we're struggling to figure out how to pay our rent. And like we're applying for government assistance. And I never thought that I would see the day that that becomes my reality so quickly. And like I'm not ashamed of any of that, because none of this could have been like expected by anyone. Like the entire world was blindsided by this. But of course, like because of that financial aspect, we were not renewing the lease where we currently live. And it ends on June 30th. So I have 2 months to figure out where I'm going to go and like where our cats are going to go. And my partner has the option to move back in with his mom. Like he wouldn't have his own space necessarily, but she has a house and she's willing to let him live there rent free. I am not welcome, and the cats are not welcome to come. Yeah. And it sucks because my partner and I have been together for 5 years. So that's a while, especially like, you know, like we're adults now. It's yeah. And so like at this point, my only option is trying to figure out somewhere to go that will accept 2 cats, because I'm stuck with the cats now, which is fine because I love them and they're my babies. That is significantly cheaper than what I'm paying now for rent, or move back in with my mom. But my mom's house is a subsidized 1-bedroom apartment in the city that I left, that I did not feel at home at all. So like I'm struggling with the idea of having to go back into a situation that I left and felt so much happier and so much more myself after leaving. And even if it is a temporary thing, like I'm already feeling all of those feelings that I had when I was in, you know, like between ages 16 and like 23, of just not having my own space, feeling judgment around the things that I choose to do and how I choose to live my life. And then like sharing my physical living space with other people and having to be responsible for that. And so I'm just like, I don't have a home anymore. Like technically I do, but I don't. And so it's like I'm realizing that home means a lot more than just the apartment that I live in and the city that I live in. It's that like sense of security and safety and belonging in just like even my own body. Because I was on the phone with my mom yesterday, and like our conversation was fine, but at some point it just got like a little not strange, it's not the right word for it, but it just got to a point that immediately reminded me of what it was like living at home and trying to explain to my mom, who is very loving and supportive, but like she's a 60-year-old woman who was raised in like a dysfunctional Christian family in Hawaii with strange family dynamics. So like her view of things, sometimes she tries to like overlay that on me being a 28-year-old woman in 2020 and having very different ideas of how things should work. And I'm just like, I don't want to have to go back to that. Like that's probably what's going to happen, but I don't want to have to do that because I know it's going to take a toll on my mental health at the very least. So if you have suggestions,
well, you're so funny. Well, first, I want to say I love that notion of, you know, home not being the physical space, not being the city. And I think really like that is at the kind of main point of it all, what makes the sense of home something that is sustainable and ever evolving. Because especially like you are mentioning, like right now with the economic crisis and the health crisis that's going on, and especially in the US, I would say, and I mean, it's everywhere, but especially in the US is what I'm seeing more in the news right now. It's like, those are the things that don't necessarily last. But I guess what I'm really trying to say is, it's like, what part of the definition of home is sustainable? And at the end of the day, it's ourselves. We are always going to be with us. And so working on that relationship and figuring out how that relates to the state of affairs around us and the people around us, and how can we be of service, and how can we ground moment to moment as best as we can, to show up as best we can in those moments, for me, is what that journey is kind of about. And definitely I have moved back with my mom. When I moved back here from Toronto, my partner at the time and I moved in with them for 8 months to kind of get on our feet and, get jobs established and that sort of thing, so we could actually take over a lease. And so yeah, it was 8 months of living back in the place where a lot of the really difficult things I had to process had happened. And, a lot of the strain in our relationship had happened. And my mom and I have a fantastic relationship now, but like, I was going through stuff as a teenager. There was divorce. Like, there's going to be things that come up when you're going through those sorts of things just in general. And so it was difficult, but I think I was able to go back to it. And for me, this is what I always turn to in times of like uncertainty or feeling like almost disjointed in a way, is like, how can I show up and be of service in this situation? And usually if I do that, it'll at least help me stay as peaceful as possible, so I can kind of like make it to the next 24 hours. And like through that, acknowledging when I need time to like just settle on my own, and creating that space where I can, which can be difficult when we're like stuck indoors all the time. But yeah, I think it's like focusing on what part of home do I have control over? And I think in that sense, it really is like identifying that the journey just is the end point, right? And being here for that can be really powerful, and really comforting, maybe not in the way we expected, but in a way that makes sense for right now.
Yeah. I like that.
Thanks.
I needed that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm looking at the clock, so I want to be mindful of our time. I feel like we've covered a lot. Is there anything lingering that you feel is like, we must talk about this? Do you feel content with how things went?
I think so. I don't know. I could go on and just
we
talk
could just
forever.
talk. Well, we can probably just plan like a catch-up call too. Like, that's also totally allowed. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time for this conversation and like sharing the parts of your journey, because I think that like, that's what I say, coffee time. Like, it's later in the day, so I'm drinking water and you're eating lunch.
I'm eating lunch and also drinking the first coffee of the day.
Oh, well, there you go. You had coffee. I did not, but I've had coffee.
15, so it might be a mistake, but oh well.
But I appreciate you holding space for this conversation and sharing. And I think, who knows if people will listen to this, but whoever does listen to this, like, I hope that maybe something resonates that helps them move through like what they're experiencing right now. And I think for me, I appreciate this because with my relationship with Toronto and like recognizing where that's at, and like right now being separated from my partner for like, this is week 8 because he's in the States. And there's that, I was thinking about it earlier today. I don't know if I'll keep this in clip, but that I think it's Edward Sharpe in the Magnetic Zeros, that song Home. And it's like, home is wherever I'm with you. And it's like,
oh yes,
it's super cute, but it's like a folky song, but it's also like horribly codependent when I really listen to the lyrics, and like, I really don't like it, but I love like the beat of it and it's super adorable. But now it's like, okay, well, great. But like, I don't have that person right now. Yeah. Like, I legitimately am living in my 600 square foot apartment. So what is home then? When there's no people, there's no connection, there's no external places that you can go to create that sense of belonging and connectedness, then what is it? And I mean, for me, it's moments like this, it's cuddling with my cat. It's creating that space for meditation. And it's anything that helps me just ground and be present and like fully acknowledge where I'm at is kind of, for me, like opting into that journey home, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's been a struggle for me because since my partner is completely unemployed now, he's home all the time, and I really value my alone time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and over the years, he's come to understand that it's not that I don't want to be around you, it's that I only want to be with me. Like, it has
Mm-hmm.
nothing to do with not wanting you. It's me just
Mm-hmm.
wanting to not have anything other than
Yeah.
myself. And yeah, it's been tough, um, because I don't have my space
Mm-hmm.
anymore, and I don't have any time to myself. Like, I'm sitting in my office right now talking to you, and it's like, thank God, like, I'm alone. No
Yeah.
one's bothering me. And like, I tried doing yoga there. My yoga studio, which is actually in the bottom floor of my office, um, did a live stream
Mm.
restorative and yin class on Thursday night, I think. And my partner went for a walk while I was doing that. And I was like, oh, like, great. Thank you for giving me like the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I couldn't even do that because the cats were yelling at me and
Yeah.
and trying to destroy the yoga mat. Um, and I'm just like, I can't even have myself as home anymore almost.
Mm.
And it sucks.
Yeah.
Like, to be honest, it just sucks. Um, but yeah, I don't know. And that's
Nope,
something
I
that I'm
get that.
struggling with too, like thinking about having to move back in with my mom is
Oh,
like,
for
I
sure.
really won't have that.
I think that's where, and I think it's important to share this because like it's probably coming up for a lot of people. And it's like those moments where it feels home or we feel most connected. It's like, okay, what can we do to stay in that? Just an extra like 30 seconds and
Yeah.
like put intention into that. So if it's like the solitude of a shower at the end of the day and like that is time where I am alone and there's no cats and there's no partner and I can just
Yeah.
be there, like extend it by 30 seconds and just like intentionally do that and like put focus on it to recognize like this is 30 seconds of just me and
Yeah.
like be there. Or like the walk home, like stop and take 3 deep breaths instead of like continuing motion, right? Like can we just physically pause? And I think that can be a really powerful way to feel into that when the circumstances make it like genuinely difficult to turn to the tools we would normally use.
Hmm.
Yeah. But alas, okay. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again for
Thank you.
everything. I feel like there's so much that we covered, and you and I think are both like extroverted introverts who
Yes.
could probably talk forever. But yeah, I really appreciate you sharing everything and opening up. And I hope that anyone who listens, once I edit this and publish it, find some sort of sense of comfort or direction. Or I always say, if nothing else, if it doesn't resonate, that can still point you back to what it is that you need where you're at. And so that can be powerful as well. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of Coffee Time. As always, I invite you to reflect on it all, take what you like, and leave what you don't. If today's episode resonated, comment below or screenshot and share to your social media. And don't forget to tag me at I am Natalie Christina on Insta. And I would super appreciate if you hit the subscribe button to help make this show accessible to more magical humans like yourself. Until next time, I am your muchly caffeinated host, Natalie of Natalie Christina Coaching.